Begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد المصطفى الأمين وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين يا رب العالمين. لقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وهو أصدق القائلين بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وانفقوا في سبيل الله ولا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة واحسنوا إن الله يحب المحسنين. Allah Azza wa Jal states what? He says, and spend in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. And do not cast yourselves with your own hands, do not present yourself with your own hands into destruction, but rather do good, for verily Allah loves those who are the good doers. Of course, the context of this surah, the context of this ayah, rather, this verse of the Holy Quran, is that many people in the world today, many of our brothers from other schools, many of our sisters from other schools of Islam, when they look at the actions of us who claim to be the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we who are those who call themselves Shia, especially during these nights of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, especially during the time of Muharram, but also during the other days of Shahada, the other nights of Shahada, they would find that they would be put off by rituals such as the chest beating and the latam that we participate in. One of the first things that you might hear is, and you would hear this on all sorts of different spectrums, starting off with people who are slightly more tolerant, is you might hear someone say something along the lines of, well, listen, I'm not a sectarian person myself, I'm not a person that hates anybody, but I do see that this contradicts the Quran, that you individuals are hurting yourselves. And of course, this is someone at the lower end of the spectrum. You have people who are further up the spectrum in certain countries where the followers of Al Muhammad are being killed, who would even get killed due to such reasoning. So we see that this ayah is something that needs to be investigated. If someone were to ask us, on what basis do you carry out such acts? Doesn't this contradict the Quran? How is it that we would respond? And I do think that this is something that requires a very honest and open analysis, much like the previous nights, inshallah ta'ala. And it's not something that we can shy away from as well. So the points of the analysis tonight would be as follows. Number one, what is the sabab al-nuzul for this ayah? Namely this verse, why was it revealed? Why did Allah reveal this verse? According to those who are exegetes of the Holy Quran, those who are specialists in tafsir. Number two, irrespective of what the revelation for this ayah was, what the sabab, what the reason for the revelation was, what can we derive from the ayah? What have the experts of the Holy Quran, those who study the ayah, understood from it? Number three, how the Muslims have generally not taken this ayah in the way that they apply it to us in their analysis, and why there's a degree of inconsistency in this matter. Number four, why certain Muslims attempt to use this ayah and they would ask the question how Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam could have known that he's actually going to be martyred in Karbala and yet follow this ayah and not be contradicting it in going to Karbala. And number five, why Shias do latam. And of course, finally concluding, six, do the Shia today currently suffer from a massive problem when it comes to presenting themselves to the world in a problem of both image and identity? Without further ado, we'll jump straight into the analysis, but we'll begin with a salawat upon Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. When we look at the Holy Quran, we find that we can't just deal with a book in this very rogue copy-paste manner. When we look at the world today, when we look at people who committed an atrocity, for example, it's been about a year since the New Zealand shooting massacre, you find that individuals like this, what they would do is they would take a verse of the Holy Quran, completely present it out of context and say, look, the Muslims are terrorists. What would they do, for example? They might take a verse that says, for example, fight them wherever you find them. How would we as Muslims generally respond in such a circumstance? We would say, look, my friend, this isn't how you do scriptural study. This isn't how you address religions. I'm not just going to take a verse of the Bible, for example, a verse from the New Testament in which Jesus is said to have said, I have not come to bring peace, but I have come to bring a sword. I'm not going to just take this verse and say, therefore Christians are violent. No, I'm going to look at it in its context. I'm going to see that the rest of the book is about peace. Therefore, this verse cannot be interpreted violently. Likewise, when it comes to any discussion about the Holy Quran, when it comes to any discussion pertaining to how we understand the Quran, the first recourse that the Mufassirin have traditionally utilized is to look into what we call the sabab and nuzul, the reason for why a verse is revealed. Namely, why did this verse come down? If it came down in a particular context, is it my right to take this verse and now apply it outside of that context? So what is the sabab and nuzul according to the Mufassirin for this particular ayah? What does the ayah state again? It states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَانْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلِكَةِ. Do not cast yourselves into destruction. The Mufassirin, those who are exegetes, those who do tafsir of the Holy Quran, they have stated that the reason that this verse was revealed, according to the general masses of Muslim Mufassirin, it states, Al-Ula, Rawa al-Bukhari and al-Huvayfa. Huvayfa is one of the companions, his name is Huvayfa ibn Yaman. He is known as Sahib Sir Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Why? Because at Ghazwat Tabuk, Rasulullah was almost assassinated by a group of people known as the Munafiqeen. And he told Huvayfa who these individuals are, but he told them, I don't want you to go around saying their names. Which is why when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi died, the companions, the Sahaba used to say that we would recognize who a munafiq was by seeing whether or not Huvayfa attends their janazah prayers. When a companion would die, the companions wanted to see, was he a munafiq, was he a mu'min according to Rasulullah? One of the ways they would know is that Huvayfa, if he wouldn't attend their janazah prayers, there's a good chance that these were one of the individuals that tried to assassinate Rasulullah. So, because Rasulullah had confided with Huvayfa the names of the munafiqeen. Anyway, Hudhayfa, he states what? وَانْفَقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى الْتَهْلِكَةِ قال نزلت or نزلت, you can read it in both ways, في النفقة. This is revealed about what? Nafaqa, giving money when someone is married, for example. One of the rights that their wife has over them is nafaqa. She deserves a certain salary from her husband. When somebody has children, the children deserve nafaqa. They deserve a certain salary from their father, for example. This is what we mean by nafaqa. So the companion states that this verse was primarily revealed about nafaqa. In a longer narration, the companion states what? The companion states it was revealed about spending in the way of Allah. Why? We were in the city of the Byzantines. Who are the Byzantines? The Byzantines, it's another name for the Romans. When the Western Roman Empire fell, it moved into the area we now know as Turkey, and they became known as the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire. This Eastern Roman Empire remained in existence for the early duration of Islam. So the narration states what? We were in the city of the Byzantines, and there came out to us a large number of Byzantines, a large number of Romans. One of the Muslim men charged at the Byzantine ranks until he penetrated among them. Namely, he went in and he managed to get in. And the people shouted and said, Subhanallah, he has thrown himself into destruction. So allow me to just contextualize this for everyone. The Muslims are in a battle. The Muslims are in a battle right now against the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, non-Muslims. One of the Muslims, he goes into their ranks to fight. He jumps in, gets into the side, they kill him. The Muslims start saying, this poor individual, he's cast himself into destruction. They're essentially using the ayah which I cited at the start of the lecture. They're saying that he's done haram by throwing himself in. Now listen to the response. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, Al-Ansari here meaning from the Ansar, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, he stood up and said, "O people, you are misinterpreting this verse. Rather, this verse was revealed concerning us, the Ansar, when Allah granted victory to Islam and the number of its supporters increased. We said to one another in private and not to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our wealth and our property have diminished." So they went into war. They're now complaining that as a result of going to war, finances are getting poor. Now listen to this. Our wealth and our property have diminished. Allah has granted victory to Islam and the number of its supporters has increased. We should now go and focus on our wealth and property and try to take care of them. Namely, they're at war and they're saying that, look, alhamdulillah, we've spread Islam. We've now grown in number. Now that that's done, we can protect our money. Let's go back to going back to business, caring about the dunya. Then Allah revealed the verse. A verse which refuted what we said. And Allah revealed that verse which I cited, the English translation of which is what? And spend in the cause of Allah, i.e. jihad of all kinds, and do not throw yourselves into destruction. Brackets. This is the brackets from the interpreter, namely the Sunni translator who has translated the narration, by not spending your wealth in the cause of Allah. So we see even this verse, which they try to utilize against us to say that latam is wrong, that these actions are wrong, it is completely taken out of its context. The cause of destruction here is that someone who withholds nafaqah, someone who withholds spending in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal, is casting themselves into destruction. So the narration states, so destruction here referred to focusing on wealth and property and abandoning jihad. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari continued to strive in jihad for the sake of Allah until he was buried in Constantinople. This narration is classified as Sahih by Al-Albani in his Silsila Hadith al-Sahihah. So we see that those individuals who would often utilize this verse in order to cast suspicions, in order to cast doubt on the Shia in this practice of latam, they're utilizing a verse which, according to their own source literature, is being taken completely out of context in order to be utilized here. Therefore, the istidlal based upon this verse is not tam in regards to its sabab and nuzul, in regards to the reason for why it was revealed. Someone might respond to me. They might respond to me, but don't we as Muslims agree that there is a principle in tafsir? There's a principle in tafsir. This principle in interpreting the Quran is known as what? Al-ibra bi'amum al-laft wala fi khusus al-sabab. That namely, the main ibra to be taken from the verse is in the generality of the text and not in the specific reason for why it's revealed. That might make sense if the text was not refuting the very false understanding that these individuals are bringing. But let us engage with how the mufassirin, the fuqaha, those who study what we call ayat al-ahkam, have understood from this particular verse. The ulama have understood from this particular verse that any action which will lead to permanent destruction, namely going to hell, is haram. But permanent destruction of a body is haram. They have placed roughly 3 boundaries in interpreting this particular verse. Number 1, random suicide is haram. Of course, this is something that the fuqaha have derived from this verse, that suicide is haram. But someone that goes out and says, I'm going to kill myself randomly, they're feeling depressed. Of course, we know mental illness is a big thing today. They're feeling depressed. They think to themselves that I want to go and end this misery that I'm in. So they want to take their life. Islam says, no, it's haram. But to be honest with you, we didn't even need this verse in order to establish it's haram. Aqlan, we believe that you can detect the qubh and the husn of particular acts. We believe that it's quite clear according to the aql that suicide is haram. You didn't bring yourself into existence. This life isn't something you gave yourself. It's an amana from Allah. Therefore, if you're a Muslim, it makes perfect sense that you can't just go around committing suicide, to be honest with you. It's not something that requires a rocket scientist in order to deduce. Now, of course, do fuqaha make certain exceptions and certain rules? To be honest with you, this is a bab which the fuqaha are still looking into. If someone is not within their right mind when they commit suicide, that's a separate discussion, but it's not the discussion for tonight that we are discussing. Secondly, a person cannot commit an act which mutilates his body or say a functioning limb or what have you. This would be haram. So what do I mean by this? Again, unless it is mandated by medical necessity. So for example, some of you might have Malaysian friends. Any of you who has Malaysian friends, particularly from that generation who are above the age of 50, you would notice that many of them have, for example, a toe missing, a finger missing. I used to be baffled by this circumstance because I knew that Malaysia had never entered any major wars. And unless there was some kind of phenomenon of mass torture, I used to wonder, how do I explain this away? So when I would ask the people of that age, they would tell me it's because previously in the Malaysian diet, with the introduction of all these American sweets that were brought over, diabetes became a real phenomenon. And in order to cure the diabetes, they would have to, unfortunately, amputate some fingers. This was just something that occurred. In this particular circumstance, it would be allowed because it's a medical reason. In other circumstances, if you had gangrene, for example, you could amputate a limb. However, to just randomly amputate a limb in order to remove something without a valid reason, this is something that the fuqaha would derive from this verse is haram. But note what the distinction is here. Permanent damage. You're permanently damaging your body in a way that would render it incapable from doing an act which you could normally do. That's the distinction here. It's not encompassing something that would be temporary damage. Temporary damage, which will get better, that is not encompassed, that is not understood by the fuqaha when looking at these particular verses. Or number 3, any action which will lead to our actual tahlukah would be haram. Now what do we mean by the tahlukah bil fi'l? What we mean by tahlukah bil fi'l, actual destruction, actual perdition, would be any act which is definitely going to take us to hellfire. So major sins, for example, someone that commits a major sin, they have to repent. The Quran is telling us don't commit major sins because major sins, the fuqaha have derived from this that it will lead to you to your destruction. Your destruction being what? Al-dhahab al-nar. So this is what the fuqaha have understood from these particular verses. They have not understood from these particular verses any act which causes a temporary amount of damage but would eventually be recovered. Now, can I prove this assertion? Someone might ask me, Sheikh, how do you know that the fuqaha have not said that this includes even those acts which include temporary damage? Well, let's just roll with this. This is what we call qa'idat al-ilzam. Let's see if using qa'idat al-ilzam, we find that these actions are all haram. Action number 1, al-qiyam laylat al-qadr. According to every single scientist in the world today, every single scientist, in fact, you can find it's a very nice video on YouTube for those of you who haven't seen it. There's a nice series of videos, they're educational. What they do is they bring an educational scientist to try and explain his particular field or her particular field at 5 different levels. So there's a very nice one where an astrophysicist explains gravity to a child, then to a teenager, then to an adult, then to an elderly person. There's a very nice video where a person's talking about sleep. Anyone who's an expert in sleep, for example, would tell you that without having a necessary amount of hours of sleep, your body is not functioning at an optimal level. In fact, your immunity system would go down the drain. If you don't have a certain amount of sleep, then your immunity system is going to start to fail, and eventually even your cognitive faculties are going to be ruptured as a result. On this particular case, are we going to say that al-qiyam laylat al-qadr bil-ibadah, according to this particular understanding of a fatwa, would be haram? None of the fuqaha of our brothers say this. Therefore, the claim that any temporary damage which is done is not founded to be true in that regard. Another aspect is that many of you would have found that your brothers on social media have been cheering on the victory of a very successful MMA fighter, Khabib. Khabib, he fights MMA, mixed martial arts. And many of the Muslims took a large amount of happiness at the fact that he was successful in the MMA fight against Colin McGregor, for example. Are we going to say that according to this particular verse that they always constantly bring against the Shia, that you're doing latam, you're damaging yourselves? Well, then what is Khabib doing when he does MMA? Is he not damaging himself as well? Why haven't people started speaking out against that? Is it because creedally he follows the same creed as them? So on the one hand, it becomes a problem for the follower of Ahlul Bayt, but on the other hand, no, it's perfectly fine when somebody else does it. This makes no sense as well. Any nation which sends people for army and military training, the purpose of the army and military training is that they would exhaust such a person physically. MashaAllah, some of the brothers here, they're regular gym buffs, I believe Mustafa, MashaAllah. So they would know what it means to exhaust someone physically. They would know what it means, and they would know that you put your body into certain hardship. Now, when you put your body into that hardship, you know that it's a temporary thing. You know that you're eventually going to get better, even though you feel that pain. So we see here that the fuqaha have not made that haram. The fuqaha have not made that haram ala al-itlaq. So we see here that the objection itself is not within its particular place. The last example I'll give in this regard is that if we believed that any temporary amount of physical damage, physical pain to the human body would be haram unnecessarily, then we would put a cap at how many children the average woman should have. Because we know that childbirth is one of the most devastating processes that a person can go through in terms of enduring actual physical pain. And no one would say that it's wajib to have a certain amount of children. No one would say that it's wajib to have a certain amount of children. This is something which is merely mubah. So we see, looking at the third area of analysis as well, this third aspect demonstrates that the understanding of the ayah which is utilized by the fuqaha of the Muslims has shown that it does not in any way violate the precepts of Islam or the ruh of Islam, nor does it violate the Quran. So on to the more juicy question number 4. And some people might view this one as the more difficult one to answer. If we are saying that the ayah is talking about those who cast themselves into permanent destruction being the loss of life, and this is about knowingly casting yourself into permanent destruction, then how do we respond to the shubha that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam knew that he was going to be killed in Karbala? Is that not therefore an act of suicide? Of course, the Muslims have answered this question in numerous different ways. Some of them are more dependent upon a theology. Some of them are more dependent upon fiqh. I'd like to look at two particular different ways in which this question can easily be answered, inshallah ta'ala. But before we do, salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So some people would argue that in saying this would rationally necessitate that the Imam did not know he was going to die in Karbala. Said in other words, the main reason this shubha is brought up, the main reason this doubt is brought up, is in order to argue that you Shias, you're arguing something crazy. If the Imam knew that he was going to be killed in Karbala, then it would have been haram for him to go. The simple solution for the problem, according to them, is that the Imam did not know he was going to be killed in Karbala. How do we respond to this? Well, the first answer is quite simple. And this first answer would be something that should be acceptable to every single Muslim, inshallah ta'ala. When we turn to the Holy Quran, we find that Nabi Ibrahim, alayhi salatu wassalam, those of us who have read the Quran were familiar with Nabi Ibrahim. And in fact, all Muslims who bring up the shubha should really be familiar with Nabi Ibrahim. Nabi Ibrahim, alayhi salatu wassalam, in the Holy Quran, before he passes a series of tests and gets made an Imam by Allah Azza wa Jal, he is tested with probably the hardest test he's ever given in his life. What is that test? He has a son by the name of Ismail from his wife Hajar. And Allah Azza wa Jal tells Nabi Ibrahim, alayhi salatu wassalam, through the form of a dream, that he is to slaughter his son, Nabi Ismail. Now, of course, someone might say to me, but Sheikh, Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam is not committing suicide in this analogy. I've never claimed that Nabi Ibrahim is committing suicide in this analogy. I'm asking our brothers who raise this shubha, our sisters who raise this shubha, and indeed any other Muslim who raises this shubha, when it comes to Nabi Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam, and the fact that he agrees to go to be slaughtered by his father. His father says, I have seen in a dream that I am going to slaughter you. What does his son say according to the Holy Quran? He says that I am one of those who are patient, and if this is what you have seen, then we submit to Allah Azza wa Jal. In doing this, was Nabi Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam violating this particular ayah by doing something which was haram? No one would argue that Nabi Ismail was committing suicide according to this particular act, and yet we find that it's being raised against Imam Hussein. And the question would be, why is that? If someone were to say, but Sheikh, in the end, Nabi Ismail is not slaughtered. That's true, but did Nabi Ismail know that when he went to get slaughtered? This is the question we're asking. Did Nabi Ismail, when he agreed to get slaughtered, know that he was not going to get slaughtered? According to the Muslims, he did not. This was a test. He went forward and he put himself into the test. In the same way, yes, by default, the default position is that no soul knows when it will die. However, those souls who are of that level of taqwa, of that level of kamal, where Allah Azza wa Jal has given them naba al-ghaybi, knowing when they are going to die, they are not allowed to run away from this fate. They are not allowed to run away from this fate. This is the fate that Allah Azza wa Jal has given them. And this makes it even more of a test, because they know that in this situation they are going to meet their deaths. And yet they do so as submitters to the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. Now if someone were to say to me, but Shaykhna, by default of him knowing, this makes it haram for him to go. That is not the case. Anyone that makes this argument is actually ignorant of both the Quran and ignorant of Islamic law. They're ignorant of the Quran. Why? Because I've said Nabi Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam is a Nabi. He's mentioned in the Quran as a Nabi. And he said that he submitted to the will of his father when his father wanted to slaughter him. So that's number one. If this as a general rule was absolutely haram, then Nabi Ismail would also be falling under haram. Now if someone were to say to me, but Shaykh, this ayah is from the Quran, Nabi Ismail did not follow the shara of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore this particular rule does not apply to Nabi Ismail. Jamil. This is a very well thought out shubha. So we'll give it a well thought out answer as well, but it would still demonstrate that the one who is raising the shubha would be, with all due respect, ignorant of Islamic law as well. What do I mean by that? So the argument could be phrased in this way. The argument could be phrased as anyone who knows that they are going to die in a certain way must run away from that fate. Imam Hussein knew that he was going to die in this way, therefore he should have tried his best to run away from this fate. I argue that neither of the premises in this argument are 100% sound. What do I mean by that? I argue that there are certain exceptions to the rule. Can I think of an example? Yes. I can think of an example which doesn't require Nabi Ismail, it doesn't require ilm al-ghaib. It's a very simple analogy for any faqih who knows basic fiqh, basic Islamic law. In Islamic law, according to our brothers and our sisters in any school, in fact, one of the things that happens is if you do one of the kaba'ir, then of course you have committed a certain sin which you wish to get forgiven. Now let me give you an example of a particular sin which is considered very, very major. The sin of zina. The sin of zina. The sin of fornication. Fornication is a massive sin according to all of the Muslims. Now according to the Muslims in the school of the Sahaba, if we were to ask them, my brother, how does someone get forgiven if they have committed the act of zina? They would say there are two things. They would say that I can do tawbah to Allah. If I would ask them, is this guaranteed to forgive your sin? Many of them would say to me, no, it's not a guarantee. If I would ask why, they would say to me, because it could be that my niyyah in doing tawbah was not sincere. I don't know. I'm a human being, I'm fallible. If I would ask them, my brother, is there ever a guaranteed way for you to seek forgiveness for your sin? They would tell me yes, one guaranteed way, which is that under an Islamic state, under a just caliph, where the hudud are implemented, the guaranteed way would be for me to confess my crime to the qadi and for the qadi to carry out the punishment. Of course, just to make clear, we don't believe anyone carries out punishments except in a just state, and we believe that just state is ruled by the Imam, the Masum, Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman. But we're talking about the beliefs of our brothers here. They would say in a just state ruled by the Qadi. Jayyid. So according to this means that if they go to a court in this hypothetical just Islamic state, and they confess to the Qadi, I have committed fornication 3 times, the Qadi is still able to say, go away, I don't want to hear it. If they had confessed to it a 4th time at this point, according to their schools of law, the Qadi is not allowed to tell them to go away. Rather, it is obligatory upon the Qadi to carry out what? The punishment. My question is this. The person in that moment, when they have confessed this sin, seeking forgiveness from Allah Azza wa Jal, when they have confessed to this sin, seeking forgiveness from Allah Azza wa Jal is a guaranteed means of forgiveness. The Qadi has issued the sentence. You are going to be imprisoned until tomorrow morning, for example, at say 11 o'clock in the morning. Your sentence of being under the had of Allah, namely the punishment, is to be carried out. Between 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock, this person maybe has an opportunity to run away. Is it wajib upon him to run away in this situation? Because according to the simplistic understanding of the ayah, they should be running away. But according to the law itself, they should be submitting themselves to the punishment in order to get absolute forgiveness. None of the fuqaha of our brothers would say in this circumstance that anybody should run away from the punishment. None of them. And this shows that there are even human circumstances where a person knows that they will face their death and yet still go into it and are not committing suicide. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. So based upon these two particular factors, we see that the claim that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam committed suicide is not found to be within standing. More importantly, according to us, anyway, when anyone listens to the Maktal, when anyone listens to the Masiba, we believe that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam was going out of his way in every single way possible to not go to the location that he was going to. And in fact, he was driven there by external forces. Namely, it was the army, the battalion of Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, which pushed him into the direction that he went into. So even with his pre-existing knowledge that he was going to Karbala, with his existing knowledge that he was going to sacrifice himself, Nizam al-Sababiyya, cause and effect, still took place. It was not just a case of his absolute free will, rather other human actors were involved. لا جبر ولا تفويض ولكن الأمر بين أمرين. Imam Hussein freely submitted himself to the will of Allah, but at the same time, other factors are what pushed him into that particular direction. So the question now, after responding to that shubha, would be, why do Shias do latam? Why do Shias do the action of latam? And this is an important question which needs to be answered. The first response to this question is that, number one, we as Shias, we don't believe in what we call cultural hegemony. What do I mean by cultural hegemony? I mean that, look, Shias are not one monolithic human body. Shias of Pakistan behave in one way. Shias of Iraq behave in another way. Shias of Iran behave in another way. If I were to ask some of the brothers from Qatif today, do you agree with the way that the Shias from Pakistan do their latam? Many of you would be like, well, it's not my thing. It's not my thing. It's not what I personally feel huzn when I do. In the same way that in Scotland, I don't come to people in, for example, China, and tell them, what are you guys doing? Why are you guys wearing white at your funerals? You should be wearing black. It's not my business. What is necessary here is that there is the action of mourning, there is the action of huzn, there is the action of showing grief for Imam Hussein, and we make sure that those actions fall within the boundaries of the acceptable Sharia. We make sure that nobody is doing anything haram. Above those boundaries, we don't go around telling people how they can show grief. We're not Nazis. This very claim that Muslims should be imposing onto everyone how they act, this is scary. This is what the world is scared of. This is when they say that, when they talk about Sharia taking over the world, this is what everybody is afraid of. Now, of course, there might be some Muslims out there that believe that what we need to be spreading around the world are short dish dashas, pulled up trousers, and red and white checkered egals. Or red and white checkered shimars. But the vast majority of the Muslim world does not believe in this cultural hegemony. We believe that the principles have been given to us by the Ahlul Bayt. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam says in a well-known riwayah, نَحْنُ نُلْقِي عَلَيْكُمُ الْأَصُولَ وَعَلَيْكُمُ التَّفْرِيعَ. We are the ones that give you the principles, and you guys are the ones to carry out these principles. You carry them out. The fuqaha will tell us if something is haram or halal, but at the end of the day, you generally do not see the fuqaha partaking in many of the azal rituals. Why? Because these are sha'bi rituals. We're not saying that they're a necessary part of a religion. We have form and we have essence. The essence of a religion is that we show huzn. We show huzn for the imam. We do ihya of the amr of the imam. We keep the affair of the imam remembered. We keep it alive through tears and through the intellect. As for how we keep it alive, this is in the hands of the sha'b. As long as what they are doing is not violating the shara, as long as what they are doing is not something that is, for example, made haram according to an explicit text, then this is their business. The problem comes about when certain members of the sha'b start to think that these actions are the actual wajib actions or defining actions of their faith. So, for example, if certain people start to argue that you're not a good Muslim because you don't do latam in, for example, the Qatifi way or the Bahraini way or, for example, the Pakistani way, this is where we would have a problem, because nobody is arguing that the Ahl al-Bayt used to mourn people in this way. I'm not claiming that Imam al-Baqir used to observe grief in this particular way. The Imams observed grief in different ways. There was an evolution over the years, but every shab, every culture should be free to express themselves when it comes to their cultural expression of how to keep the affair of the Ahl al-Bayt alive. And this is why the Shia do latam in this particular way. But if somebody were to ask me, Sheikh, do we have any narrations which say that they did it in this particular way? Yes, we have a couple. In Al-Kafi, we find the following narration. We find the following narration in Al-Kafi. And it's part of a longer narration. I'm going to take out only the necessary parts. After, of course, Rasulullah had been injured in a battle, they had scratched their faces and spread their hair and placed dust upon their foreheads and had torn the sides of their dresses and tied their abdomens for grief of the Prophet. So when he saw them, he said good things for them and told them to cover themselves and enter their respective houses. So we see, even in the lifetime of a Prophet, there is this concept of people showing this level of grief. And this narration is Sahih, it's in Al-Kafi. Likewise, we have at the Shahada of Amir al-Mu'mineen the following narration. That when Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam called out his famous words, Tahaddamat wallah, we find that Kulthum, when she heard this announcement, she hit her face and her cheek and she screamed, Ya Abata, Ya Aliya, Ya Muhammada, Ya Sayyida. Now these narrations are found in our books, and they establish that these were cultural practices carried by the Arabs at times of grief. So when we were told to show grief as the general principle, this is the asl. This is the principle. The tafri', the application of a principle, could be in terms of chest beating, of course. It could be in terms of something else. It could just be in terms of crying. We don't go to funerals and start telling people how they should behave. Imagine within one family, a father dies. He has 4 daughters, for example. One of the daughters, she's absolutely quiet. She's not saying anything, she's not crying. All she's doing is looking depressed. She doesn't want to eat, she doesn't want to drink. The other daughter, she's crying her eyes out. She can't look at anyone. The third daughter, she's scratching her face, and the last one is slapping her cheeks. Would it be appropriate for me to be like, well, why is the third one not following the practice of the first? Why is the second one not practicing the practice of the fourth? This would be a level of inhumanity that is not dictated by the religion of Islam. Islam does not expect us to be a bunch of robots. But as I said, the problem is where we try to take the particular cultural forms that we have today and we do make them into what we believe are the defining motivations of actual Islam. The Ahl al-Bayt, they asked us to do many things in the name of remembering Imam Hussein, wa ihya al-amr. This is what we call abra. But in every action we do, we should be taking away an ibra as well. Now, as I mentioned, why we do the latam is because the Ahl al-Bayt gave us the principle. The principle is show grief. We take this principle, we apply it as a fara. Is there any philosophy behind these principles? Of course there's a philosophy. I mentioned about 3 nights ago that some of the great ulama, people like Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, when looking at the fiqh of Islam and the rituals of Islam, have stated that the rituals of Islam should fulfill 3 criteria. Number 1, the ghaya would be a connection with Allah Azza wa Jal. Number 2, they develop within the human being a sense of responsibility. And number 3, they create an improvement in the area of sulukiyat, namely human behavior, a growth in human behavior. In addition to ibra and abra, these things make a very powerful bridge to get the human being to the top of spiritual growth. Now, if someone were to say to me, but Shaykhna, in these sha'bi movements where people do latam, none of these 3 things are being observed. Well, that's not my problem, is it? I can't force, in the same way that much of the Muslim world today, whether or not we go to the Arab Sunni world, the Malaysian countries, the countries which are known as part of what we call the Malay regions, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, When we go there and we see that some Muslims, all that they have left of religion is that they fast during Shahri Ramadan. Is it my right to be like, therefore we should throw out fasting because people aren't doing it right? No. Just because people have missed out the philosophy of something, just because people are not following or observing the spirit of something, does not mean that we need to throw out the baby with the dirty bathwater. If we have dirty bathwater, we get rid of the dirty bathwater. We don't throw out the baby with it. Nor do we make a mountain out of a molehill. Yes, there is room to discuss whether or not this community is implementing these factors when doing aza, but it's not required that we throw out the aza entirely, because this is one of the actions which has led to the secularization of this religion. So in regards to the sixth question, do we have an image problem? Without a doubt, the answer to that question is yes. Without doubt, the contemporary Shia of today have an image problem. We have an image problem, we have an identity problem. We are not presenting things in the correct way. We are not showing things in the correct light and original philosophy that they came from. Is this problem unique to Shiism? No, I don't think it is. When we look at the way that Muslims carry themselves out in the West, generally we understand that many of these people are first and second generation immigrants. Therefore, they have not known how to market themselves, how to express themselves, how to articulate themselves in the best of ways. This is a problem that happens with any religion when it comes into a new region. But that ultimately doesn't mean that the thing is wrong. That ultimately doesn't mean that the entire ritual is wrong and that it needs to be thrown out. Yes, of course, Muslims are very much in need of Islah. And that is why we are commemorating the days of Ashura in the first place. Because Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam said that he did come out as a Muslim in order to revive, in order to restore the original principles brought by his holy grandfather sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And when he came to revive that within ourselves, of course, we need to be going through a constant process of Islah. However, just because the Muslims aren't doing that doesn't make Islam wrong. And this is what we need to understand when it comes to this particular dimension of the religion. We find when we look at the narrations of Ali Muhammad, they emphasized, they highlighted, and they demonstrated the philosophy that they intended for us. Imam Zayn al-Abidin and Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam have both had narrated on their behalf that the one who understands his religion is worse upon the shayateen than the worship of 1,000 believers. Of course, what we mean by worse upon the shayateen is they affect the shayateen in more ways. What is being said here is that ultimately the Imam is saying that one who understands his religion, if you're able to do that and maintain your religion, then you are the biggest enemy of the shayateen. And this is why you should try to understand your religion. Imam al-Sadiq, in Kitab al-Mahasin, he has a very beautiful narration. He says, if only I could have whips hit upon the heads of my followers until they do tafaqqah. If only my followers could have their heads whipped until they do tafaqqah, until they understand religion in this deep way. Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq said, if I was brought one of the youth of the Shia who does not have an understanding of his religion, لِأَدَبْتُهُ, I would have disciplined him. Now, of course, we understand the greatness of that. What does that mean that the Imam would have disciplined us? It means generally the understanding would be physically. Generally the understanding would be physically. Now, this is telling you how much the Imam wanted for those who call themselves his lovers to be a cultured group of people, to be a group of people that understand the philosophy behind everything that they do. Just because, unfortunately, we have fallen into this new way of looking at things. And of course, this is a problem that any religion will fall into. The Muslim world has been destroyed by phenomenons like colonialism, by phenomenons like nationalism. All of these things that have torn apart into the Muslim body constantly go on to weaken the religion. And of course, in times like this, it's only natural that the understanding of a Muslim towards anything he does will become very idealistic. He'll be creating an identity for himself, and he'll hold on to an identity that suits himself. It's normal. This happens not just to the Shia, it happens to the Muslim, it happens to pretty much everyone in these regions that have been obliterated by these phenomena. So it's our duty, inshallah ta'ala, to try and get ourselves out of this phenomenon. Every human being throughout his life will ask himself or herself 4 ultimate questions. The first would be a metaphysical question. Is there a purpose in life? Is there a God? Is there a creator? A cosmological question. What is this universe that I live in? Why am I here? A psychological question. Who am I? And finally, an ethical question. How should I behave with others? These are all questions that human beings would generally ask themselves. We find in Karbala, Imam al-Hussein takes all 4 of those questions and gives us an understanding of all of them. Therefore, Karbala can be, the rituals can be, if we take those 3 dimensions I mentioned earlier, one of the most powerful demonstrations of a civilization ever. The question is, of course, are we going to allow it to go into that direction? And the answer is that really depends on ourselves, and the ball is in our own court. We mourn because we remember the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, who came to revive and preserve true Islam out of his foresight. We, in this particular moment, when we look at that foresight of the Imam, we see that, like any other wise person, any other person that's building something, some of you have companies, Sayyid Hussein has a company, I'm sure he thinks about how his company is going to turn when he moves on at some point, how things are going to run. Inshallah ta'ala, we're entering into the Masiba point now. When we look at this, we see that anyone in their wise foresight tries to plan for the future. They try to plan for the future. And in doing so, they would move things in a particular direction. If I can get rid of the lights, please, inshallah ta'ala. I can get rid of the lights and get the mic sorted out. Jazakumullah khair. These individuals, they think of their future. They think of how things are going to look in the future. I want, inshallah ta'ala, all of the mothers, all of the fathers who are listening to me in their homes, listening to me in this audience, to bear with me tonight. Tonight is a night that you will be able to feel more than anyone else, inshallah ta'ala. Tonight is the night of someone who is very, very oppressed. Someone who is very, very oppressed. It is the night that I call the night of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam. It's the night of Imam al-Hassan because Imam al-Hassan is oppressed by us. We often think to ourselves that Imam al-Hassan is someone that did not have this brave stand of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, but his circumstances were entirely different. The narration states from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, from Imam al-Baqir, from his grandfather alayhi salatu wassalam, that when Imam al-Hassan was passing away, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam entered upon him, and in doing so, he saw that Imam al-Hassan was in a very weak situation. In this particular moment, Imam al-Hassan was crying, and Imam Hussein started to cry as well. Imam al-Hussein asks Imam al-Hassan, what is it that's making you cry, my brother? What is it that's causing you this pain? Is it the poison in your body? Is it this substance which is causing your liver to corrode? Imam al-Hassan in this particular moment said, I do not cry for this, my brother. I cry because there is no day like your day, and I will not be there to witness what happens to you on the plains of Karbala. However, Imam al-Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam, he did have a son. That son, he goes by the name of Al-Qasim. For Imam al-Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam resembles his grandfather in a way that no one else resembled him. And Al-Qasim, his son, is very much like this. Many of you who are mothers in the community, many of you who are fathers in the community, you'll remember those difficult days in your life where you're sending off your son to university for the first time. Maybe you're sending him off to his job for the first time, and you know that it's not easy for you because you know it's a rough world out there. You know it's a very rough world out there, and things are not easy in the real world, but you know you've got to send him in because they need to go through it. Whatever negativity they might experience in life, it's something that eventually they'll have to go through. And even if they go through pain, it's just something you have to bear. But it's never easy to send them out into that situation. Today we see many people who are ill. When they get ill, one of the things that they might do, especially if they have very young children, and especially someone that gets really, really ill, they have something like terminal cancer, they might start to write letters and documents which they hope would be read by their child at a time when that child might really need to read their words. For example, the day they graduate, the day they get married. And I've seen some beautiful videos of someone who's going through the process of dying, and they know that they're dying, they write these letters and the kinds of things that they say, and even people opening up those letters at a later point. Al-Qasim, a very young man, someone who is barely a teenager by our standards. And of course, you can consider what kind of person that was. You can consider the hopes that a mother has for someone like that. You can consider all the hopes that a mother has for someone of that age, that they would go on to get married, that they would go on to become something successful. Imagine instead that you know that the fate of your son is that he's going into his first battle and his last battle. The first battle that he'll ever fight and the last battle as well. Al-Qasim, he goes to visit Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, and he tells him, Ya Amma, Ya Aba Abdullah, Halli min rukhsa. Imam al-Hussein tells him that I have something for you. He gives him a chest. This chest is from his father, Imam al-Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam. Imam Qasim opens up the chest and he reads the letter from Imam al-Hassan. The letter tells him that, oh my son, I'm so proud of you. Today you will fight valiantly for your uncle. And today you will be met by Rasulullah, who will receive you with open arms. He is going into Shahada today. Of course, his mother in this point is very, very proud. But which mother can tolerate to see her son goes into the battlefield? What Imam al-Hussein has to do in this moment is probably the most painful thing that someone who is an uncle could ever do. Any of you who have brothers, any of you who have siblings that have children would know that you have a special relationship with the children of your siblings. They're like your children, but they're not quite like your children. They're like your children in the sense that you're close to them, but you still feel really guilty when you're getting them to do anything harsh, when you're being a little harsher to them, when you're disciplining them. For at the end of the day, it's not your son. At the end of the day, it's not your daughter. In this particular instance, think of how Imam al-Hussein was. Imam al-Hussein whips out a box, and in this box, for the first time, Al-Qasim is presented with the imamah of Imam al-Hassan. Al-Qasim is presented with the armor of Imam al-Hassan. Al-Qasim is presented with all the things that Imam al-Hassan used to wear. He goes and seeks permission from Zainab and his mother. And of course we imagine the words of his mother as she would be saying, "O night, prolong your hours. O night, prolong your hours. Don't allow this day to come." But now the day has come and Qasim is heading out to battle. Sayyidah Zainab starts to cry. She thinks she's seeing Imam al-Hassan in front of her eyes for the first time. It's as if Imam al-Hassan has come back, but no, it is the young son of Imam al-Hassan. It is Al-Qasim. Al-Qasim goes into the army and he starts to cry out, "I am Qasim, the son of Al-Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet. By Allah, we will not be fought by these dirty hypocrites, these munafiqs. We will not be fought against by the kuffar. We will defend the grandson of the Prophet, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam." He goes in, he fights like a brave lion. It's his first battle, and yet he fights with a valor and the bravery that his father, Imam al-Hassan, had. He kills many from the enemy, but then, unfortunately, something goes wrong. Al-Qasim's slipper, the na'al of Al-Qasim, the thread tears, and he has to stop in order to repair it. Why is this great, my brothers and sisters? This is Al-Qasim, the grandson of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen is the one that would repair the slipper of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now his grandson is repairing his own slipper. In this moment, the enemy overcomes him. They strike him on the back of the head, and they kill him in this moment. Al-Qasim hits the ground. Of course, he did not have a horse in this battle. He calls out, "Ya Amma, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah." Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam comes out and he He flies into the Maidan like a lion. No one is able to stop Imam Hussein until he comes to the body of Al-Qasim, who is of course already passed away. Imam Hussein in this moment narrates very sad words. He says, "Oh my nephew, it pains me, but I am in a situation that you call out for me, and I am not able to help you, and I am able to come to you, but I am able to offer you nothing." وَلَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى قَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيُّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ.
Salawat, please.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، بلا کو معلا کیا، خون میرا آج خاک شفا بن گیا، میں نے بچپن کا وعدہ وفا کر دیا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میں نو کے سنا پر ہوں، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میرا گھر میرے بچے میری زندگی، آپ کے دین پہ سب میں نے قربان کی، میرے ماتھے پہ بوسہ دو اب آخری، برسرے نو کے نیزہ سواری چلی، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میں نو کے سنا پر ہوں، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، دین و قرآن بچے تیرا کعبہ بچا، تا قیامت رہے گی اذاں کی صدا، مدرسہ بن گئی آج سے کربلا، ہائے نانا مگر میرا گھر نہ رہا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میں نو کے سنا پر ہوں، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، چکیاں پیسنے والی ماں کی قسم، میری آغوش میں توڑا اکبر نے دم، کیسے لاشیں جوان لایا سوئے حرم، اپنے وعدے پہ سہتا رہا غم پہ غم، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میں نو کے سنا پر ہوں، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، بھائی 32 برسوں سے جو ساتھ تھا، میں نے وعدہ نبھانے میں وہ کھو دیا، کھا گئی اس کی شانوں کو یہ علقمہ، وہ گیا اور درد کمر دے گیا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میں نو کے سنا پر ہوں، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا، میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا، میرے نانا یہ دلہا یہ کم سن جواں ایسے روندھا گیا دشت میں علامہ اپنے بیٹے کو پہچان پائی نہ ماں اس کی دلہن نے خود توڑ دی چوڑیاں میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا مینوں کے سنا پر ہوں میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا ہاں وہ اصغر جو صغرا کی تھی زندگی جس کی خاطر وہ بیمار بچی میری چھوٹے چھوٹے سے کرتے جو سیتی رہی اس کا خون اپنے چہرے پہ مل کے ابھی میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا مینوں کے سنا پر ہوں میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا میرے نانا سکینہ کا غم دیکھیے عمر اتنی سی اتنے ستم دیکھیے جلتی ریتی پہ اس کے قدم دیکھیے کتنے مجبور ہے آج ہم دیکھیے میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا مینوں کے سنا پر ہوں میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا کتنے لاشیں اٹھائے ہیں ایک روز میں کتنے آنسو بہائے ہیں ایک روز میں سینکڑوں تیر کھائے ہیں ایک روز میں سارے وعدے نبھائے ہیں ایک روز میں میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا مینوں کے سنا پر ہوں میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا نانا میرا وعدہ ہوا پورا
اللہم صل علی محمد وآل
يوم ذكريني من تمر زفت شباب حمن العرس محروم حنيتي دم المصاب يوم ذكريني يوم ذكريني من تمر زفت يلا وحق الشباب على الشباب يما ذكريني يما ذكريني من تمر زفت شباب من العرس محروم من العرس محروم حنيتي من المصاب شمعة شبابي شمعة شبابي من يطفوها حنيتي دمي والجفن ذاري من ثدي النيبة راضع بصافي الحليب اي والله وبها الشهادة صار لي قسمة ونصيب حفيت بدمي خل يفرشوها حنت دمي حنت دمي والجفن ذار التراب يما ذكريني يما ذكريني من تمر يلا وين اللي فاقد له شباب شهداء يما ذكريني من تمر زفت شباب وياي من العرس محروم حنتي همي المصاب يومي المبارك أصبح الدين شهيد اي والله وافزع العمي من يظل بالطف وحيد رملة بمصابي خلي واسوها حنت دمي والجفن ذار التراب يما ذكريني من تمر زفت شباب اسمع أهلي وصوني بالوفا بيوم الطفوف ومن دم وريدي يصبح خضاب الجفوف هذه وصيتي يلتسمعوها حنتي دمي والجفن ذار التراب يما ذكريني يما ذكريني من تمر دهري يتهمني والتزم عمي برباي ما أعز عنه مهجتي وروحي ودماي رملة بمصابي خلي فجعوها حنت دمي والجفن ذا يا جابه ومدد ما بين اخوته قعد عدهم يا ويلي وهم موته يا وبسم عن النسوان صوت 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 يا حسين ومصاب ولأجل العين سجابه ومصابه ولأجل العين سجابه يا حسين يا لذكرك بطرف لساني وهذا اعتقادي بدفترك عنواني خويا ويا روحي الهادي خويا ويا روحي الهادي يا حسين يا لذكرك بطر في لساني يا أبا عبد الله وهذا اعتقادي بدفترك عنواني ولأجل العين سجابه مأجورين إن شاء الله. اسمع المستهل وساعدني بالجواب ويا رملة هذه الليلة. بدموعي ربيتك للحومة زفيتك عالغبرة خليتك يا وليدي جسام بدموعي ربيتك للحومة زفيتك عالغبرة خليتك يا وليدي جسام للحومة زفيتك عالغبرة خليتك يا وليدي يا وليدي جسام بدموعي ربيتك للحومة زفيتك عالغبرة خليتك يا وليدي جسام يا وليدي جسام بدموعي ربي هلا للحومة زفيتك عالغبرة خليتك يا وليدي جسام يا وليدي جسام يا جاسم امك انا تدريني انا اللي برباك ذابت سنيني يلي ما ترضى تسمعونيني افتح عيونك يما حاجيني افتح عيونك يما حاجيني يا وليدي في صدري نار الحزن تسري، يا وليدي في صدري نار الحزن تسري، وينار لا